The outer conditions of a person's life will always be found to reflect their inner beliefs.
We'll always be tinkering with those restrictions, but it makes it incumbent on the individuals to have discipline, personal discipline, to show respect for your former role and not engage in, dramatic conflict of interest. Don't work on a matter at the regulatory agency and then resign and a week later join a firm that's, directly subject to that. I mean, come on. What I would say to some of my colleagues, come on, guys, you had a public trust and you held a position of public trust. Show respect to it by what you do in your post life in a way that's appropriate and discreet and balanced. And I think if people operate with a sense of self-discipline, both before, the way they act when they're in government and when they act after government, we should be able to maintain this, I think, healthy. Some people call it a revolving door. The revolving door phrase really cracks me up because having spent time in Washington, I realize that there are hundreds of thousands of people in Washington that go in a revolving door from government agency to government agency to government agency to government agency. That's the real revolving door in Washington. The revolving door is not to spend a lifetime in the commercial world, then go serve your country for several years to bring that experience to bear. And then when you're done, return to private life. That's not a revolving door. I think that's honorable service, but it does require people to treat it with the respect it deserves.
The centralized system has a trust deficit. From senators day trading on stocks to Fed chairmen selling the top, and ex-SEC officials giving guidance to the crypto markets. The people can clearly see these conflicts of interest. Either these problems are addressed by the centralized system or the people will address them. If you benefited from this system, the last thing you would want is for the people to address them. Judge Netburn has called this type of behavior hypocritical.
The people going to the presidential palace in Sri Lanka and jumping in the swimming pool, taking over the home of the president. You talk to a lot of world leaders of low and middle income countries. Are they feeling a sense of worry that this kind of disruption might happen? I mean, the last food crisis, we saw 45, 46 violent protests around the world, including the Arab Spring. Is this part of the zeitgeist in the discussions you're having now with world leaders?
Oh, definitely. This is becoming part of the conversation, and rightly so. Let's remember 2019. What did we have in 2019? Protests in Paris, in Lebanon, in Chile, and then COVID came and pushed us all to stay home. Now, the eruption of social discontent is very visible in quite a number of places. And I want to say to our audience the following. When your family cannot have the very basic, which is food, you will be on the street too. There is nothing more horrifying than to be deprived of not the luxury of food, but the basics of food. And that is now happening, unfortunately, in far too many places.
The world is moving to a decentralized paradigm. For a change to occur, there needs to be a stressor. As we have seen in the financial markets, the stressor is here. Food scarcity, supply chain breakdowns, the cost of debt, and moving money. Decentralized ledgers can greatly benefit everyone by cutting out middlemen and reducing costs.
Look, we have to recognize that there is a tectonic shift happening. We live in a world that is changing very rapidly. It is a more shock-prone world. And unfortunately, we have not been able to find a way to make a multipolar world functioning with no frictions. So we also have some fragmentation that certainly we should be concerned about.
The unipolar world has been built over decades and decades, and the way it was built is a result of the technologies of the time. Distributed ledgers as well as other technologies enable a level playing field, a multipolar world without the frictions and fragmentations that Kristalina discussed.
To encompass the use of crypto technologies must, in my view, be grounded on the iron principle of same risk, same regulatory outcome. The starting point for regulators should be to apply the same regulation to the risks inherent in the provision of a financial service, no matter how it is provided. But differences in technology may mean that existing regulation simply doesn't work in that new context. However, implicit in our regulatory standards and in our frameworks of regulation are the levels of risk mitigation we have judged necessary. Where we cannot apply regulation in exactly the same way, we must ensure that we achieve the same level of risk mitigation. In other words, same risk, same regulatory outcome. And if and when, for certain crypto-related activities, this proves not to be possible, where we just can't find a way to mitigate and manage to the extent necessary, that's to say, to the extent we manage that risk in other parts of the financial system, we should not let those activities proceed.
If you have noticed, the countries that suffer from the unipolar world are the countries that are the quickest to regulate crypto assets. We are near the end of this system, and even the US that has benefited the most is seeing side effects. Triffin's dilemma. We can't effectively fight inflation as the reserve currency, and our trade deficits are at a perpetual loss. These side effects are real problems. This is why Biden is pushing for the CHIPS Act to allow manufacturing in the states. If all goods are created outside of the U.S., this leads to domestic insecurities and ultimately makes the U.S. vulnerable. It's a matter of national defense to bring industry back to the U.S. With the reserve currency, this is difficult to do that.
As well in bringing this forward.
Yeah, so for your listeners who, and there's no reason they would spend a lot of time watching how legislation moves through Congress, what legislation needs to move through, it's like a train that leaves its part of its starting point and then moves along, and it goes from village to village and town to town to its ultimate destination. And people get on and people get off, but eventually it arrives. What's important about the Lummis-Gillibrand bill, which you just mentioned, a train has now left the station. And that train is comprehensive. It's got many cars on it, deliberately so. Some of those cars will be taken off along the way. Some will be added. Some passengers will get on. Some passengers will get off. But the important thing is now the train has left the station. It's bipartisan. It's comprehensive. And it's very, very thoughtful. I'm very optimistic. It won't happen in this Congress. This Congress is effectively done now because after the 4th of July recess, every congressman and woman, all 560 of them or so, are running for re-election in November. So they're busy campaigning. And as far as the Senate, 1/3 of them are up for re-election in November. And so it's unlikely that this bill will get done in this Congress. But I think it's very likely that it will get done in the next Congress, which will start in January. And in the first year of every 2-year Congress has a 2-year term. In the first year, a lot gets done because the second year, once again, becomes an election cycle. So I think there's a very good chance that we'll see legislation in 2023, a very good chance. And I had the privilege of working with Senators Lummis and Gillibrand on different parts of that bill and giving some thoughts and sharing with them some views. I'm very supportive of it. I've spoken to, on their behalf, on its behalf, I've spoken to a number of members of the Senate and Congress. I think it's a very good starting point. There will be a lot of negotiation, but I'd be surprised if by the end of 2023, early 2024, we don't have comprehensive crypto regulation in the United States. And I think I think we'll all benefit from that. And that will now provide instructions to the SEC and the CFTC. They won't be able to avoid duties assigned to them under that legislation. And I expect that some of those duties will be to take a much more open-minded and positive view on crypto development.
As Rosie Rios and Christian Carlo have stated, the train has left the station. The U.S. regulating by 2023 and 2024 is ample time for the system to break and a reaction with blockchain technology to come about. Christian Carlo had a say in the Lummis-Gillibrand bill. He is an ex-regulator that has the ear of congressmen and senators. His law firm has, in the past, did a research paper discussing XRP and if it was a security or not. They came to the conclusion that it was not.
So the past big drawdowns in the crypto space have been somewhere in the range of 75 to 90%. So we're probably somewhere near a typical bottom. But the thing to remember is that demand for crypto assets, for digital assets, for blockchain assets, is ultimately driven by a use case. I think in the short run, you can pump up demand with internet memes and good press, but in the long run, it's driven by what is it that we can actually do with this technology. And so for me, the bullish signals are improving business use cases, increasing business deployment, fixing some of the sort of structural issues in the industry like better regulation. And there are a bunch of positive signals there. And the ones that I look a lot at are, so for example, the new regulatory framework in Japan is a really strong one, and it signals that more and more governments are going to be clearly regulating stablecoins, which are hugely and systematically important for decentralized finance. Secondly, the ramp up in ESG tracking technology. So more and more use cases are being ESG for example, carbon tracking, supply chain management. These are things that will drive demand for crypto assets, blockchain technology for the next decade or more. And those are all proceeding along. And in that respect, again, still feels very reminiscent of 2001, right, where asset prices may have crashed, but the value proposition and adoption kept on going.
Crypto assets have not even scratched the surface of potential use cases. But as Peter Boyd from Ernst Young has stated, that utility will be key for the long-term vision. And this shakeout is very similar to the dot-com boom and bust cycle.
Adapt your regulation as it evolves. And I think that what's really needed here by the two market regulators, and I think the CFTC is doing a good job of this, is to continue to see how this new technology, this new architecture, this internet-based approach to value, whenever I have these conversations, I always say, let's stop and talk. What is crypto, right? What is crypto? Up till now, all value, your retirement money, my savings money, my bank account, are recorded as liabilities on roughly 7,000 banks around the world. All, aside from the few cash dollars and dollar euros, most money, 90% of money, is basically a bank liability somewhere. What crypto is saying, okay, fine, we got a bank liability-based system, but what if we did something different? What if we came up with some protocols that allowed us to use the internet to store value in the same way that we used to make phone calls on proprietary lines owned by phone companies, and now we use FaceTime to call anybody in the world 24/7, 365, using the World Wide Web, using that web of computers based upon certain protocols. What if we come up with software protocols that allow us to use the web as the store of value, as the confirmer of value, as the transfer of value, rather than relying on these proprietary bank balance sheets? That's a whole new architecture of money and value in banking. It's revolutionary. And it's not the job of the SEC, the CFTC, the FCA, the Bank of England, the ESMA to thwart innovation. It's the MAS. It's the responsibility of regulators to see how innovation is changing markets and to adapt with that innovation. And that's the big challenge. And that's the one thing, when I'm in private meetings with current regulators, fellow regulators, former regulators, I say to them, guys, things are changing right before our eyes. Don't be the guys that are trying to hold it back. Don't be the guys that say, why do we need to land a man on the moon, 50 years ago? Don't be the people that say, why do we need an internet? Why do we need computers to talk to each other? Because it's going to happen. Be the ones that say, okay, it's going to happen. How do we anticipate it? How do we bring the core values that made our financial system strong? Values of transparency, values of fairness, values of prohibition against fraud and manipulation. How do we bring that to bear in a new internet-based system of money and value in the way that we're able to do it in the old bank liability balance sheet-based system of value?
The current system will evolve and these technologies will be absorbed by the traditional system. The economic benefits of cost savings and efficiencies will attract this amalgamation and evolution. The innovation used in a responsible manner is ultimately what the regulator is looking for. And even though the crypto world is in contrast of this, there are players that are using innovation in a responsible manner.
Because we need it for these countries and to energize other countries to step forward. There is a growing risk of a debt crisis. I want to spell it out as clearly as I can, and I will do that in the next days over there. Why? Because the level of debt has gone up during the pandemic. Financial conditions are tightening, more expensive to serve it. And as I mentioned before, for dollar-denominated debt, not a good place to be if you don't earn dollars. So when we look at the horizon, today, 30% of developing and emerging markets are either at or near debt distress. This doubles for low-income countries. 60% of low-income countries are there. So we don't act, guess what is going to happen? Not good for these countries and certainly not good for financial stability.
You don't.
There is a dollar shortage. This is why the DXY has been climbing. Countries' debts are denominated in dollars and there are less dollars within the system. At the same time, the dollar is a bridge currency, and the current banking system is slow, causing the dollars to be locked up while trade happens. This encourages debt. Moving away from this system will have tremendous benefits to the entire globe and a better quality of life by removing all middlemen and bringing the costs down.
Putting a lid on it. But when they do so, when monetary policy tightens, what does it mean for a world that accumulated more debt to handle the pandemic? Servicing this debt is more expensive, and when you top it with dollar appreciation, for countries that don't earn dollars but have to pay in dollars for their debt, it is twice as hard. So debt crisis in the making.
A strong dollar is painful for everyone, including the US, due to Triffin's dilemma. The train has left the station with digital assets that will lead us to a multipolar world, where the frictions and fragmentations can be bridged with public chains. You are today where your thoughts have brought you. You will be tomorrow where your thoughts take you. James Allen. Thanks everyone, I hope you enjoyed the show. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. If you enjoy work like this, please consider joining my Patreon.